All right, week 12 of the semester, we're almost getting to the end. This week, we're going to talk about renewable energy policy, and we're going to start with a quick description of energy consumption and sources in the United States. I'm going to talk about the patterns of energy consumption and sources. Before I do that, though, a couple of reminders for you. The first one is that exam 2 is here next week. That exam is going to be released on Friday this week. Also, are you thinking about a topic for the policy brief? If not, you should be thinking about a topic of your interest on which you want to write about. So hopefully this gets you going. The one thing that I would advise against, though, is do not write a policy brief on climate change at a global scale. And the reason that I don't want you to do that is because there's so much material out there that when you write this thing, if you want to cover this topic, you're going to go crazy. So don't do it, believe me. Okay, this is information that is coming from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, which is an office that is part of the Department of Energy. And what you will see here is a pie chart that has all the main sources of energy consumption in the United States in 2019, which is the year for which we have the most up-to-date data. And you'll see that there's about 100 quadrillion BTUs are consumed in the US in the year 2019. And you'll see that the biggest source for that is petroleum or oil, which is right here. About 37% of it, of that energy that is consumed comes from oil, basically. Then you have natural gas, 32%, and after that you have renewable energies, 11%, and inside of renewable energy you have all these different sources, and you'll notice that the most important one is wind, followed by hydroelectric. This is dams that basically dam rivers and then produce electricity. And solar is at 9%. I'm going to be concentrating in solar and wind later on. And the reason I'm doing that is because these are two sources that keep growing, whereas hydroelectric energy, it's been stalled for about a decade and a half now. Then after renewable energy, you have coal, 11%. And finally, nuclear electric power, 8%. All right, those are the sources of energy. Where does energy come from? But now we're going to talk about where does energy go to. So there are 5 energy use sectors in the United States, and here you can see the amounts in BTUs, in quadrillion BTUs that they use. So for instance, the electric power sector, or the electricity generating sector, utilities that produce electricity for you to use at home, they use a massive amount, right, of those BTUs. They use about almost 40% of all the energy that is produced in the US goes to electricity generation. And then we have what is called the 4 end-use energy sectors, which are transportation, the industrial sector, factories, for instance, that use electricity, the residential sector, your house, my house, and then the commercial sector, right? And all of those are very important. You see that they use a lot of energy. About 60% of the energy, or a little bit over 60% of the energy that is used in the US goes to those 4 end-use sectors. Now, what you have here is what basically I showed you in the previous slide, this stuff, the sources, and then here you have the end-use sectors. And you can see where, for instance, petroleum goes to. 70% of what it's used or what it's produced by oil goes to transportation. That makes sense, right? Because most of the cars that we use are powered by oil. And then you can see that 24% goes to the industrial sector, right? So if you follow this line here, it goes to the industrial sector. And you'll see what's the distribution by source and where it goes to, right? So natural gas, for instance, where does most of natural gas go to? Well, 36% of natural gas goes to the generation of electricity. This is the electric power sector, which I showed you is the most important one, right? Right here. What about renewable energies? Well, renewable energies, most of it, 56% actually goes to the power generating sector, because there are many utilities in the US that are transitioning from coal and from natural gas to generation through solar or wind sources. And finally, where does coal go to? Coal is currently about 11% of the energy generation in the US. Look, 90% of it goes to electricity generation. So whatever coal is left, it's still used to power plants. This is a very interesting graph because it shows how all these different sources of energy have evolved through time in the United States. You'll notice that petroleum, oil, has been the main staple in Americans' energy diet since the 1970s in terms of just having the greatest relative importance of all these sources. You'll notice also that coal was growing until the mid-2000s, and then at about 2006 or 7, it starts going down, and it keeps going down even after the election of President Donald Trump. You'll also notice that natural gas has been growing, and this is thanks to the fracking revolution in the last couple of years of the first decade of this 21st century. And so you go from about here in 2007 or 8, and you'll notice that relative importance of natural gas just grows, right? And the other thing that you're going to notice here is that nuclear energy is basically stable in terms of the relative importance, and finally renewables is growing, but it's growing at a pace that a lot of people think it's insufficient to transition to a decarbonized economy, which is what we need in order to prevent the noxious effects of climate change. Okay, now you know where energy comes from, what are the energy sources to produce energy, and also what are the sectors that use the most energy in the United States, which are the electricity generating sector, public utilities mostly, and also the transportation sector. You also know that oil is still the most important source of energy in the US economy. But what about production? What this graph shows you is that natural gas is actually produced in larger quantities in the US than crude oil, which is second, right, with 25 quadrillion BTUs basically. And then you go to coal, which is about 14.3, nuclear, this is natural gas in liquid form, by the way, biomass, wind, hydro, and others. So what you need to do is put this together with what I showed you before, right? And you'll notice that in this case, natural gas accounts for 35 quadrillion BTUs, and it consumes about 32 quadrillion BTUs in the US. What happens to the rest of that? Well, that's natural gas that the US exports to other countries. And you'll also notice that the US is currently producing about 25 quadrillion BTUs of crude oil, and that it's using about 37 quadrillion BTUs. So where is the difference coming from? It comes from other countries where we import oil from, right? So this tells you a little bit about what are the differences and the imbalances in the American energy consumption diet, basically. And this graph gives you the US primary energy production by major sources from 1950 to 2019. And there's a couple of things that you're going to notice here. The first one is that in 1998 was the year where coal was at its peak. So 1998, coal produced about 24 quadrillion BTUs in that year. It's right there, that information. And then it starts declining. You know, it kind of hung on there for a few years, but it never really went above that. So the fact that the coal industry has been regressing in the last few years is not something that is due to the policies of previous administration, the Democratic administration, which is something that President Trump ran on in 2016. It's something that responds to market forces that are older than that, right? And then in 2019, you'll see how coal stands at about 14 BTUs, quadrillion BTUs. And what you can see there are also the differences between natural gas, which grew a lot, right, from here to here. And then you'll see that crude oil has been also growing from 13 to 26 quadrillion BTUs. Natural gas in liquid form has been growing as well. Nuclear energy stayed kind of stable. There hasn't been a lot of nuclear energy capacity added to the United States mix of energy sources in the last decade or two. And finally, you'll see that renewables has grown quite a bit, almost double the amount, right? So everything seems to be growing, and that makes sense because the economy keeps growing and we need more energy, obviously, to power that growth. But at the same time, you'll see that one of those sources that used to be one of the main sources, coal, is no longer that prevalent, right? All right, questions you should be able to answer from this short lecture. What are the main sources of energy in the United States? What sectors use the most energy? And how have the sources of energy been changing through time? Which sources are becoming more important and which sources are becoming less important? Thank you. I'll see you in the next lecture.